Yeah, cold nights I must confess, yeah. There's something in my soul that kept telling me to hold on. Even when the world turned its back on me, I knew deep inside that I wasn't meant to be bad.
Welcome to When I Was Homeless, a podcast that shares real stories of resilience and hope. I'm your host, Gabby Cunningham, and despite fighting off a winter cold, I knew we couldn't delay bringing you this very important first episode of 2025. Today's conversation is especially timely as we emerge from the holiday season, a period when domestic violence cases traditionally spike. Studies show that domestic abuse incidents increase by 30% during and immediately after the holidays, often triggered by financial stress, increased family time, and heightened emotions. We're honored to be joined by Casey Rogers, a survivor and advocate whose story powerfully illustrates the often invisible link between domestic violence and homelessness. What makes Casey's story particularly compelling is how it challenges our preconceptions. As a successful advertising executive and primary breadwinner, her experience reveals how domestic abuse, particularly financial abuse, can affect anyone, regardless of their circumstances. Content warning: this episode contains discussions of domestic violence, financial abuse, and emotional manipulation. While we approach these topics with sensitivity, some content may be distressing for some listeners. What you'll hear today isn't just about homelessness or domestic violence. It's about the hidden ways abuse can manifest, particularly through financial control, which affects 99% of domestic abuse survivors. We'll also touch on how these situations impact children, who often bear silent witness to these struggles, creating generational cycles of trauma. I encourage you to stay with us until the end, as we'll be sharing critical resources as we'll be sharing crucial resources, warning signs, and information that can help you or someone you know. Each story matters, each voice deserves to be heard, and each guest brings us closer to understanding and hopefully preventing these interconnected crises. Casey, thank you so much for being with us here today. I know
You're
you've been
welcome.
Oh, thanks. I know you've been incredibly generous in sharing your story.
I am happy to be here and share my story.
When we first connected, I was really struck by how much you've overcome and how open you are to sharing this journey. I believe you're joining us from Massachusetts, correct?
Yes,
Yeah. So, how's the weather there? I know that a lot of the nation is getting some really Arctic weather. Are you guys affected at all?
we're getting very, very cold temperatures here. Yesterday it was in the teens. Um, and even our dog didn't really want to go out, and she's a husky. So
Oh,
it's mostly the wind. We have a lot of wind right now, but we don't have the snowfall, which I'm grateful for.
well, I hope you stay warm and safe.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we dive in, I just want to remind you, like we talked about before, this is your platform, this is your story. Share what feels right. And if you'd ever feel like you need to pause or revisit anything, feel free to let me know.
Okay.
As you know, this is a podcast about shedding light on homelessness, not just as statistics, but as human stories with real people, right? And so, Casey, your story really speaks to the intersection of domestic abuse and housing insecurity. And that is something I feel so many people face, but we don't really talk about enough. So I really hope this episode helps others connect with your story and feel seen. Can you take us back to when your journey first began?
I absolutely can. And a lot of the memories of that time, even though it ended like almost 14 years ago, are just so fresh in my mind because I have several friends that are working on the same issue, yourself included, about talking about the intersection of domestic violence and homelessness. And for myself, I never imagined being in a situation where I would experience the emotional upheaval of trying to decide whether to leave a relationship or, like end up homeless. And for me, what happened was I was in a marriage for 25 years, and the abuse wasn't apparent because I was the primary breadwinner. And as long as I was bringing in the lion's share of the income, my late husband was happy with the status quo. It wasn't until we had children, and I had children in my 40s, we had a set of twins, and I was commuting 5 hours a day to a job in Manhattan from our home in Pennsylvania. And I got tired of it because I was missing my children's early years. And it was very problematic because if my transportation was late and they were in daycare, we ended up paying $100 an hour for overtime. So I quit my job and I took a part time job, but my income was not what it used to be. I worked in the advertising industry and I made a substantial amount of money. And that's when the abuse became very, very apparent because throughout the years of our early marriage, he tried to isolate me. There was a lot of gaslighting. There were a lot of things that in retrospect I can identify, but I didn't identify them. It was just sometimes I just felt like he was, a jerk. And I didn't know how to verbalize things at that point. When he started becoming financially abusive, trying to control all the money that we had because it was the first time in our marriage that he was working full time. He was making the lion's share of the income. And all of a sudden, money became a real hotspot. And he stopped supporting the lifestyle that we had when I was making the money. Groceries became an issue. Why am I spending so much on groceries? Um, like even though we could afford it, it wasn't that we couldn't afford it. It was just that he became very, very controlling. And he also started doing things like racking up credit card debt to fix apartments that we had invested in. So things became very uncomfortable, but it wasn't until the children were about 8 years old and we decided to move to Canada because he had lost his job. He was a copywriter and he had lost his job due to no fault of his own, but he was out of work for almost a year. And so we sold our house and we bought an income property in Canada. And the intention was is that we would no longer be subjected to long commutes and we could spend time building a business and spending time with our children. And 4 months after we moved up to Canada with the intentions of opening up a restaurant, he moved back to the States. He took a job back in the States, leaving me with the twins in a country where um, the larger part of the population spoke French, and I was left to run a restaurant, a new business on my own, and raising our children. And that's when I really figured out how devastating the emotional and verbal abuse was because I felt so much better when he was not there because I wasn't walking on eggshells all the time. And I was able to be myself and make my own decisions. And the business afforded me an income that was independent of him. Fast forward, I was up there for almost 4 years on my own, and he would visit, but the time that he spent up there was minimal, except for a couple of stints where he was between jobs and he came up and we tried to make it work, but it was awful. Um, I had grown accustomed to being my own person again and being independent from him and feeling better about myself. My self esteem had returned. And he kind of forced my hand. He wanted us to move back to the States, complaining that he was missing the twins' childhood. And he made it so that I couldn't afford to stay up in Canada. He cut me off from all of his income, wasn't contributing at all to the support of our property and childcare or, costs for raising the children, etc. And I sought the advice of an attorney up there. And because he was living in the States and I was living up there, but all our paperwork for citizenship was in his name, she advised me to go back to the States. She said it was going to be very, very expensive for me to try to stay in Canada if he wanted to seek custody, which I think that he did. So at that time, I wasn't really sure what was going on. I was kind of convinced that he was having an affair, and that's why he wanted me to come back there. But I didn't know for sure. And my story kind of begins with finding a little notebook that he left behind with all the passcodes to his email. And I logged on and I started reading things that just really enlightened me about who he was as a person because he was lying to everybody about things that I did or didn't do. For an example, we had hired an immigration attorney, had paid a substantial amount of money to, get everything in order so that we could become Canadian citizens. And he claimed to one of his relatives that I had dropped the ball, that I hadn't followed through, that all these things that, did happen didn't happen. And nobody would know the truth because I wasn't down there. So he was creating this narrative around me that I was spending money and all these other things. So I really realized what I was up against when I moved back there because I had no income at all. I had no cell phone because my cell phone was Canadian. And when I got back there, he controlled every single aspect of our finances. Um, he paid all the bills, but if I needed gas in the car, he gave me money, but he expected a receipt. Um, he claimed that we didn't even have enough money anymore so that we could get a landline telephone. And without long distance, that was $12 a month. And he insisted we couldn't afford it. And because I had no access to the bank account anymore, um, he controlled everything. So my story with homelessness happened in, it was 2010. And he kept threatening me. Everything I did was wrong. If I moved a piece of furniture, he would yell and scream and tell me that I had no right to do it, that he was paying the bills, and he had the right to determine where the furniture was placed. Um, he was so tense all the time when he came home. A lot of times he would just lock himself in my son's bedroom where he would spend the night and just was very explosive. And I became so fearful of him, I started to plan to leave. But I had no money and I had no idea how to safely navigate this because he was so um, unpredictable. So I made a plan with a friend that I made in this new community. And we moved a lot of my stuff very, very surreptitiously to her house so that I could get it once I was resettled. I made sure that I took pictures of everything on a camera so that I could put everything back the way that it was so he wouldn't discover, um, you know, like it wouldn't look obvious. And I made plans to leave and go and stay with a relative for a while. But it was very, very, very frightening because the situation that I was getting into, I was in my 50s at that point. I was so afraid of losing everything. And this was during the recession. Jobs were, minimum wage jobs were available, but it wouldn't have been enough to support myself or my children. And we also had 3 cats at the time, and we had a dog. And I was afraid to leave them behind because I thought that he would end up putting them in a shelter. So, the things that really plague people when they're trying to exercise themselves from an abusive relationship, those are some of the biggest obstacles because when the most dangerous time to leave or the most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is when you're about to leave. That's when the violence can really, really escalate because the abuser knows that they're going to be losing control of you. And I ended up leaving and I had $50. That's all I had. And I went to a relative's house and we did bring the dog. Um, and it was the scariest time of my life. The situation that we were in was safe, but it was wildly uncomfortable. It was, I was independent for most of my life, and I was now living in somebody else's household, and they had very, very strict, you know, the way that they lived was very, very different than the way that I lived. My children were miserable. Um, the dog wasn't really welcome, so that made it really difficult as well. We were sharing accommodations. My kids were in their teens at that point, that made it very uncomfortable. But the only other choice that we had was going to a shelter. And it was such an intense emotional upheaval that I started to rewrite in my mind how bad the situation was. And I started kind of accepting the abuse as being more my fault and trying to convince myself that it wasn't as bad as it was, even though he was very threatening. He used to say things like, wait until you find out what's going to happen to you, and things of that nature. Whenever I, try to either reason with him or confront him about anything. And he was a much bigger, I tend to be, I'm very petite. And, he was very threatening. So I did end up going back after he promised that he was going to change. And that's something that's very, very common with women, that they end up, if they find themselves homeless or without, housing security, even though I was never like living in my car or, staying, somewhere that we were completely unsheltered or in, like a shelter itself, um, my heart and my soul were homeless. I felt so disrupted in my life that I could barely function. I was trying to find a job and my resume was all over the place. And I just felt so unsettled. And I think that captures the feeling that a lot of women experience when their lives are so disrupted, that they feel this overwhelming sense of, you know, defeat when they're trying to extricate themselves from an abusive relationship. So, what I've learned since then is how much I have in common with so many other women out there. Um, when I started writing the book, I first wrote the memoir under the title Our Better Selves, From Secrets and Lies to Healing and Forgiveness. And I got a lot of really, really wonderful feedback on that. But I met a woman, her name is Kat, and Kat and she was actually the graphic designer for the book cover of my second work, which is a work of fiction called The Color of Frost. And The Color of Frost basically outlines kind of a manifesto for how to um, how to combat the issues that we face as victims of abuse, and especially financial abuse. The main character experiences um, kind of like something similar to what I did. And Kat and I met, and we started realizing that we had so much in common. She was financially abused, but in a totally different arena because the abuse that she experienced was at the hand of her father. And so we decided to use our experiences to try to help other women by making them aware of all the warning signs and what they can do to heal from the trauma they've experienced. So I've been out there, and we also have another partner, Justine, who experienced abuse in a different way, that it was parental abuse. And we have united to form an organization called IKnowWhySheStayed.org. And our entire mission is centered in the experiences that we've had with abuse and trying to provide insight and a program where women can first identify their situation. And I know it sounds crazy, but I didn't realize that I was even abused until I sat down and I started writing. I just thought that what I experienced was a bad marriage, that my husband was unreasonable and he was um, not a very kind and loving person, that he had betrayed me. But what I realized when I started writing is that he did everything in his power to control me. And he controlled me by controlling the finances. And when I started realizing how many other people experience the identical thing, and I started doing research, the research tells us that 99% of women that stay in domestically abusive relationships do so because they're also financially abused. They get cut off from bank accounts, from assets. Their spouse might run up like tons of debt, like my husband did. He ruined our credit. We ended up in bankruptcy, which he blamed on me, even though I wasn't. I had none of the credit cards. Um, so by first helping women identify their experiences by giving them um, a narrative that centers around financial abuse and what Kat and I experienced, because my story is one part of the memoir and her story is another part of the memoir. We have created a way for women to identify their own experiences so they can say, "Oh my god, that's what happened to me." And that's what happens with a lot of people that read the memoir. The other thing is that we've done is we've created a reader's guide that shows text within the book, the memoir, that identifies the abuse. So, for an example, my late husband kept telling me that anytime I had a relationship outside the marriage, that I was being a bad wife and mother, and that people were just using me because at one point he thought I was going to be a very successful playwright. I had written a musical and I was getting a lot of traction with it. And he kept on telling me that people were just using me. Um, every relationship that I had with with anyone outside the family, they weren't there because I was a good person and fun to be with or kind and loving. They just wanted to use me for what they could get. And isolation is a big part of abuse. So, all these things are identified in our reader's guide to take the reader through what it is that abusers do to establish coercive control. So, that's the first part of our program. The second part of our program is confronting the trauma and helping people reframe their experiences with abuse so that they are able to rewrite the narrative. Because when you're in an abusive relationship, the person that's abusing you tells you who you are. And I went from being a very upbeat, outgoing person to being a shell of myself. I was fearful. I was um, socially um, timid. I wouldn't go out. Um, I wouldn't communicate with people. I just kept to myself because what I experienced just let me feeling that I was unlovable. That's what he told me all the time. I was not lovable. Even if he didn't use those words all the time, that's what he told me with all the other things that he did. So, in the second part of our program, people get to reclaim who they are. And the third part of our program is just an enormously organized resource guide for those that are trying to extricate themselves from an abusive relationship. And the fourth part is about maintaining your financial stability, overcoming debt, overcoming the narrative around finances, and finding your financial freedom so that we have the whole gambit from entering into identifying your experience to completely being able to extricate yourself with job advice, career advice, um, and all these other things. And one of the things that, like I'd love to wrap up with this is that one of the reasons why our program is so important is because so many people fall through the cracks. Those are the people that end up homeless. Those are the people that, for one reason or the other, they can't. They can't take advantage of the resources that might be available. A lot of times, resources aren't available, especially transitional housing. We have something like 2,000 different domestic abuse shelters in the US, serving over 80,000 people a year. And the sheer number of people that need the services don't get to take advantage of them just because of the overwhelming need. So the people that fall through the cracks, those people out there that have to make a decision, do they trust that their abuser is not going to get violent to the point where they end up maimed or even murdered, or somebody in their family, their children, their pets? Or, we often see the abuser taking family members and doing harm to them. So the choices are staying and trying to deal with the person that's abusing you, or extricating yourself. And often women end up homeless or in shelters or situations that are very, very difficult to navigate. So our program fills the gap. Our program can be accessed in private. We have a offline resource that is being made available that they can keep with them on them. It's called a power pen, and it has the 4-pillar program on it. And just being able to go someplace and access this information in private without their abusers knowing it, without their abuser being able to track what's on their browser history or on their cell phone or whatever, they can access this information when they're ready and when they're safe, um, is a game changer. It would have been a game changer for me if this had been available because I would have known what resources were available in the area that we landed when we moved down from Canada. Um, so that's pretty much my story, and we're out there. We're trying to help people. Um, we're doing work that I'm so committed to. Um, the three of us, we're all authors, and we're doing a big event called Authors Against Abuse so that we can raise money to put the product in the hands of the people that need it. Um, and it's very affordable. Um, the people that need it the most will get it for free. Um, and we're just really proud of what we're doing and really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it on important podcasts like yours, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Casey. Where can we find all of your resources? They're going to be linked on our website,
Mhm.
formybonuschild.org. But could you tell us directly where to find you?
Sure. The website for I Know Why She Stayed initiative is called iknowwhyshe stayed.org. And there you can find information about obtaining the power pens, about Authors Against Abuse, and we are going to be uploading the links so that people can actually purchase the book, purchase the reader's guide, and those kinds of things. Um, we also have information on the event that we're doing in April. April is Financial Awareness Month, so we've chosen to do it at the end of April. And our goal is for people to be able to get this product for free. So 100% of the profits from the purchase of the pen go back into the initiative. So if people have a friend or a family member or somebody, they can give them this pen that has everything loaded onto it. They can keep it safely in their purse. It doesn't look like it has the hidden USB drive on it, but it does. And they can use it at their own discretion. If they want to find out information, I have to say, because I've been so involved with the initiative, I haven't really updated my personal website, but it's caseyrogers.com. It's Casey with a K, Kasey. I am on Instagram under Casey Alamode. Um, I think my Facebook is Casey Rogers author. I Justine, who is one of my business partners, handles a lot of our social media because I'm not really good at that. Um, but we're always there to help and really believe that what's going to be a game changer is that the more people that understand the link between domestic and financial abuse, especially young women. We're developing programs that can be put into colleges and even high school to show the warning signs, to get people to understand when they give up their financial independence, they're giving up so much more. They're giving up their independence and some of their choices. So that's how people can get in touch with us, and we just so appreciate the support and the positive feedback that we're getting from people that we've met. And we don't even have to tell them what our program is about sometimes, because when we just say the title of the book, they're like, "Yep, mm-hmm, I know," because they've experienced it.
You do such incredible work, and I am so thankful for you and your organization, your business partners. I learned so much this episode,
Thank you, Gabby.
so I appreciate that. Before we sign off, you mentioned the warning signs. So if you could just leave us with a few warning signs in case someone listening is going through a situation right now and they also don't realize perhaps they're in a situation.
Oh, I would love to. And if I may share, we created a little video, and on it, one of the slides talks about financial abuse. And it's very succinct, but let me just give you an overview. When somebody, like in general, if somebody is isolating you, if they are gaslighting you, trying to tell you um, things are not what they seem to be, even though you know better, um, that's a big warning sign. If they're trying to control your actions, your job, like showing up at your job and threatening your employment opportunities, spending money in ways that is going to increase your debt, um, signing loan documents on your behalf that you didn't authorize, um, making it difficult for you to even hold a job, um, preventing you from having um, access to either financial assets or bank accounts, um, giving you an allowance, preventing you from actually making an income from a joint business venture. Like my husband, I made nothing off the restaurant that I ran for 3.5 years. It all went to paying expenses. And I never was able to spend any of that money on my own behalf or save or whatever. Um, if somebody is trying to control you as an individual, um, that's where the abuse starts. It's taking control of your life, your time. My husband used to try to control my time. Like it was one of the big signs that I didn't see. If I wanted to go out and spend time with my friends or do something, I was a bad wife or mother. I'll give you an example. Like one time, we were traveling, and this was after I'd quit my job, and we had to stay at a hotel, and at night I wanted to take a shower so I didn't have to do it in the morning. And he was like, "You can just do it in the morning. Just get up in the morning and do it, because I don't want the shower to keep me awake." Well, in the morning I got up, I wanted to take my shower, and he said no. He was like, "If you take your shower, when you're in the shower, I'm going to take your purse, I'm going to take your keys, I'm going to take the kids, and I'm leaving." We had no place to be at any particular time. He was just trying to control me. And that's the kind of behavior that really indicates abuse. But financial abuse is really when they do things to control your ability to be independent of them. And it usually begins with money.
Casey, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome, Gabby. And may I say thank you so much for providing this very, very important platform and the work that you're doing, because what you're doing intersects so much with what I'm doing, and we're all part of the same team.
Your courage and not only surviving, but now helping others through I Know Why She Stayed is truly inspiring. To our listeners, remember that homelessness is not an identity. It's an experience that can happen to anyone. And as we've heard today, it often intersects with domestic violence in ways that aren't all, it often intersects with domestic violence in ways that aren't always visible. Whether you're experiencing financial abuse, emotional manipulation, or finding yourself without stable housing, please know you're not alone. If you or someone you know needs support, visit formybonuschild.org for resources or reach out to iknowwhyshe stayed.org to access their PowerPrint program and other vital resources. Remember, financial abuse affects 99% of domestic violence survivors, but there is help available. Until next time, this is Gabby Cunningham, reminding you that every story matters, including yours. Stay safe, stay warm, and know you deserve to be heard, believed, and supported.
Stay strong.